I'm delighted to share with you today the exciting findings that I had when I asked myself a question: what makes a difference between the elected women representatives who succeed and those who don't? Let me set the context first. We all know that India has incredible diversity. We all know about languages, we all know about villages. Consider this: 1.37 billion people, we have a GDP of close to $4 trillion, 29 states. Until very recently we had 7 union territories, now we have 9 as we know. Over 650,000 villages, 800 million people, of them 375 million women live in villages. That's an incredible population, isn't it? In 2019, 78 women will hold the position in the parliament, which is the lowest house as far as the political governance is concerned. But in 1951, it was only 25. But when you consider a period of 70 years, it's not really impressive, is it? Only from 25 to 70. Now, when the 73rd Amendment was passed, with the 1/3 reservation, the intent was to give opportunity to these women. We all know about women empowerment, gender parity, gender diversity, but when it comes to action, very little is done in India so far. But I'm hopeful. So when I started to ask this question about who are these women who are successful and what is the difference between successful and unsuccessful women, elected women representatives, I found out this based on establishing a relationship between the successful women and what it means to our Indian economy. And I don't know whether you know this, but look at this. There is a very significantly high correlation between women in political governance and inclusive growth that India will have. And consider this. These women come from unprivileged backgrounds. How many of you consider yourself privileged? Could I have a raise of hands? If you ask me, we all are incredibly privileged. We are sitting here, we have been endowed with a lot of things that God has given us. But consider these women who are not educated. Some of them are educated to 3rd grade, 4th grade. They can't speak proper language. They are seen as sexual objects by their men in the villages. They have been treated completely unfairly, and they have not been given any voice. These are the women that I'm talking about who have made a difference to the villages. So let's find out what has made this difference. When you think of a woman in a village, what are the images that come to your mind? Somebody with a ghungat, somebody who is silent, somebody who is sitting in the kitchen, somebody who is not really, just carrying the, absolutely. But these are the women who do not have voice, right? And I started to find out from these regressive backgrounds, what is it that takes them to progressive actions for their villages, for themselves. So the idea was to find out about this difference. So what I did, I basically looked at the state of Maharashtra. I looked at all the different villages and the districts, and I set out to actually talk to them, understand their surroundings, understand their environment, understand the people who are there in their lives. So I did about 120 deep interviews with them in 19 villages of Maharashtra. I did 20 interviews with the subject matter experts. And I did something called critical ethnography, which is basically about motivational interviewing. It is all about creating that psychological safe space for these women to open up. And let me tell you, after I did these interviews, I was speechless. It was incredible experience. Something that I found I could not have ever imagined. Well, I was trying to find out something like a universal theory, as you know in physics, right? Scientists are trying to find out the theory of everything. I was trying to really find out something which no one has found out so far, right? But I was wrong. And we'll find out why. What I started with was really to look at the factors which really make a difference. So I looked at geology of the village, I looked at the social conditions, I looked at the political backgrounds of these elected women representatives, I looked at their economic status, I looked at the environment that they live in. many of these women, when they are elected, they come from backgrounds of the politicians. And there is somebody who really sponsors their entry into the politics. But entering politics and becoming successful in politics are two different things. What I found out was, if you look at this lesson, the significant influence and moderate influence, what is shown in red arrow basically says that those factors had significant influence on the performance of these elected women representatives. And you can notice there that there were two set of factors which really made the difference. There were the social conditions and psychological profile. So for example, if in villages, if somebody came from relatively better economic backgrounds and with political backing, one would assume that they will make a difference because they would be influential. But the fact was otherwise. It was the psychological makeup of these women, it was the social conditions, it was about whether these women felt safe in terms of interacting with others, that really made the difference. So then I asked myself, let me sort of demystify this further, and I started to look at factors which explain this. Now this is a dense slide, but I want you to dwell on this slide for a while. Again, the red arrow indicates the significant influence, the blue arrow indicates moderate or little influence. At the center, if you pay attention, there is something called EWR performance, which is the performance of the elected women representatives. And you will notice that there are two things. There are some words which are kind of shouting out from this slide. What are those words which are shouting out? That these are the words of self-confidence, love, self-love, respect. There are words like leadership, and there is something that you see when out there, which is village as a family on the right, on the top right. If you look at the red arrows and where do they start from, where do they go, what I arrived was an incredibly important but a very simple truth. What was that simple truth? Love. And this is one of the most used cliche word, but I realized after interviewing these women that it is the notion of love that really makes a difference. Now let me explain this a little bit better. I realized the women who really embraced the notion of love, who loved themselves, who tried to spread love among its family members and the villagers, were really the women who made the difference in the way they interacted with each other, not only in the Gram Panchayat, but also with the villagers. And their interactions, their belief that they were worthy of being loved really made the difference. And this is very important. You saw there was a phrase of self-confidence out there. Those who had self-doubt always questioned whether they were worthy enough to be loved. Those who had self-confidence always believed that they could make a difference and they were worthy of being loved. And when they looked at themselves and when they looked at the villages, they looked at it what the psychologists called mother leadership. They treated villagers like their daughters, sons, and that really made the difference. The truth was very simple. It was the notion of love. When I set out to find this out further, and I questioned myself, but how is it that these people are going to love themselves suddenly? They all come from the same backgrounds, they're all given the same set of variables, they come from the same environment. So what is it that makes some women love themselves and love others? What is it? It was very important. It was about ability of these women to have the psychological safety around themselves and socialize themselves that really gave birth to the notion of love. So the three things really stood out very starkly. One who embodies and spreads the notion of love and acceptance is able to progress oneself and others. But one who rejects it, one who really spreads animosity and alienation, ends up with progress, which is basically regress for everyone, even for that person, even for villagers. So it's very simple, right? When we talk about competition these days, we talk about basically coming first and being top ranked against somebody else. It creates competition. It creates unhealthy competition. What you face in your daily lives today is felt and faced even by these villagers, even by these women. But I realized that women who did not think of other women, who did not think of their husbands and their spouses who really smothered them, or their environmental conditions that really suppressed them as sort of deterrents to their progress, were the ones who really made that change possible. They accepted those variables. Once they accepted those variables, they were more peaceful. Once they were more peaceful, the ability of this notion of love to sort of spring up in their minds and hearts was significantly more. And that was really astonishing. Because for me, I thought that parents, the good parenthood or the good social conditions would really make the person prosper better. But what I've realized, it was all about embracing and accepting the conditions, not rejecting them. That really gave rise to this notion of love. An interesting thing comes later. This notion of love really made them dare to go out and then talk to their villagers and understand what is it that is needed to make a difference in their personal lives as well as the lives of the villagers. And that really made a difference. So the truth was deeply connected with the notion of dare. So the idea is really, imagine if there are women who get this psychological safety across all these 650,000 villages, what is likely to happen? Potentially, there are 10 million elected women representatives that are likely to get selected. And imagine, if you were to set up therapeutic communities in these villages, what is likely to happen? Just to provide that psychological safe space. Interestingly, we referred to this whole tribe element earlier. And I found the same. Wilfred Bion, the British psychoanalyst, did the same thing in the Second World War, when he actually tried the community-based healing, community-based therapy. And these women need therapy. So the idea is, if we were to set up these therapeutic communities in these villages, just imagine what is the power that could be unleashed. You imagine 10 million elected women representatives with the power of psychological safety are able to unleash themselves, realize their potential and their village's potential. What is the power that we can really unleash? It will add to 2 percentage points of the GDP. And that's the inclusive growth that we can establish with better social conditions, better economic conditions. Thank you.